Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about a reflex arc. So, all a reflex arc is a fast, involuntary response to a stimulus, which means that we can avoid, or hopefully avoid, damaging ourselves. So the example that we're going to look at is the involuntary response. Involuntary just meaning I'm not choosing to do it. It happens without me even thinking. Of when if I accidentally put my hand on the rings of a hot hob. So if I imagine the hob was on and I accidentally put my hand on it, my hand pulls away without me even having to think about it. So it's a really, really rapid, quick response. Now we're going to see what is going on in the nervous system in order for that to happen. So first of all, let me just draw my finger, which is here. And here are the rings of the hob that I'm accidentally putting my finger on. Now, in this particular example, the hot hob, we call it a stimulus, because that is the thing that I am going to detect. Now, in my finger, I have lots of these things called receptors. Now, receptors receive a signal. So it's my receptors that detect a change in the environment, and my receptors detect that this thing here is hot. So I put my finger on the hot hob. The hob is the stimulus. Receptors in my finger detect that that is really hot. Now, in order for anything to happen, we need to send this information to the central nervous system. So in this particular instance, when we're dealing with reflex arcs, we don't send the information all the way up to the brain. Now, the reason why that is, we don't want to send it all the way up to the brain because it would take too long. So instead, we send it to another part of the central nervous system, other than the brain, which is the spinal cord. So our spinal cord is also part of the central nervous system, and this is involved in reflexes. So a stimulus is detected by the receptors. Now the receptors send a signal down a type of neuron called a sensory neuron. Because this is the neuron that we are sensing. We are sensing this stimulus, so it travels down a sensory neuron to the central nervous system, in particular the spinal cord. Now, within the spinal cord, we have our second neuron. There's 3 different neurons involved. The sensory neuron is the first one. Within the spinal cord, we have another type of neuron called a relay neuron. Now, the way I remember this relay neuron is if you think about a relay race, what happens in a relay race is the baton gets passed from one person to another as they complete the race. The relay neuron passes the message from one neuron to another neuron. So it's passing that message on a little bit like in a relay race. Now the relay neuron is entirely within the spinal cord, within the central nervous system. So we then pass it on to the third type of neuron, which is called a motor neuron. Now let's think about what we're trying to do. The whole purpose of this is to get our finger away from that harmful stimulus as fast as possible. So we need this signal to be sent to muscle so the muscle can contract and pull my finger away. So my muscle can pull my whole arm away. So here's just the diagram here to show the muscle in my arm. Now the muscle is referred to as an effector. So the effector within a reflex arc is anything that's going to, well, we have our effect, which is to contract. So just a reminder, this neuron here is called a motor neuron. Now the way I remember motor neuron is it begins with an M, and it's normally attached to a muscle that's going to cause movement. So that's a nice way of remembering it. So as soon as the signal travels down this motor neuron to this effector, the effector will contract and it will move my finger away. Remember, it's really important that it's really fast because the longer that my finger's on the hob, the more that it's getting damaged. That's why in a reflex arc, it would take too long for that signal to travel all the way up to the brain, then us to think, oh, wait a minute, I need to move my hand, and then to send it. So this is why it goes to the spinal cord and not the brain. So just to recap, let's just write down at the bottom the different stages involved. So to begin with, we have our harmful stimulus. For example, our hob. What we then have is a receptor which receives that signal. So the receptors are in my skin. What we then have is a sensory neuron. I remember sensory because I'm sensing that particular stimulus. I then go into my central nervous system and I have a relay neuron in my spinal cord. The relay neuron is just going to pass this signal on. After my relay neuron, it travels straight to a motor neuron. So my motor neuron is going to be attached to a muscle and involved in movement. After my motor neuron, it's attached to an effector, usually a muscle, but this could be a gland, for example. And finally, what I get is my response. And my response in this particular instance is to contract, to pull my finger away. So that's how reflex arcs work. Thank you.